right, welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to tackle a really powerful but kind of tricky tool in clinical research, the non-inferiority trial. So if you're thinking about running a study where your new treatment doesn't need to be the champion, it just needs to be good enough, well, this one's for you. You know, for the longest time, this was really the only question that mattered in clinical trials. The whole game was about proving your new drug was better than a placebo, or better than whatever the current standard treatment was. Simple, right? A clear-cut goal. But what if better isn't the point? What if your real goal is to be just as good on the main outcome, but you bring other awesome benefits to the table? Maybe your new treatment is way safer, or a lot cheaper, or just easier for patients to take. That's exactly where non-inferiority trials come in. And trust me, it's a completely different way of thinking. So let's dive in. Okay, here's the game plan. We're going to walk through the whole thing step by step. We'll cover the core logic, the make-or-break design choices you have to make, how to actually read your results, and some of the really unique traps you've got to watch out for. So let's jump right in. Why on earth would you deliberately choose a path where you're not even trying to prove your treatment is better? It sounds a little strange, but the answer is all about the trade-offs. See, you go down this road when your new treatment brings something else really valuable to the table that isn't just about raw power. Maybe it has way fewer side effects, which is huge for patients. Or maybe it's a simple pill instead of a painful injection. In cases like these, giving up a tiny, clinically meaningless amount of effectiveness is a trade that's absolutely worth making for the patient's overall well-being. Now, this is where things get weird. The core logic is completely flipped on its head. In a standard superiority trial, you start by assuming there's no difference. That's your null hypothesis. And your job is to prove that wrong. But in a non-inferiority trial, you start by assuming your new treatment is unacceptably worse. Your entire goal is to reject that idea. It really is a backwards, through-the-looking-glass kind of world. And that brings us to what is, without a doubt, the single most critical decision you will make when you design your trial, setting that non-inferiority margin. You'll see it written as the Greek letter delta. This one value literally defines whether you succeed or fail. So what is it, really? Think of the margin as your line in the sand. It is the absolute maximum drop in effectiveness that doctors, regulators, and you are willing to accept in exchange for all those other benefits your new treatment has. And let me be clear, this is not a guess. It's a number you have to rigorously define and justify with hard evidence. So how do you actually justify this margin to, say, the FDA? Well, a common and very rigorous way to do it is with something called the 95-95 method. It's basically a structured process to make sure your margin is based on solid historical proof, not just wishful thinking. Okay, step one is M1. First, you have to establish, with a ton of confidence, just how good the standard treatment, your active control, really is, compared to a placebo. You do this by looking back at all the old trials, doing a meta-analysis, and finding a conservative estimate of its true effect. All right, now for M2, the tricky part. You have to decide what chunk of that proven historical benefit, M1, you're willing to give up. Is it half? Is it a quarter? This is a really tough call that takes both statistical smarts and, just as importantly, sound clinical judgment. Your final margin, your delta, is then built from this acceptable loss. Okay, so you've set your margin. Great, but you are not done yet. Not by a long shot. There are a bunch of other design choices that are absolutely crucial if you want a result that people are actually going to trust. First, your active control, the drug you're comparing against, it has to be a fair competitor. That means it needs rock-solid historical proof that it works. Second, your trial needs what's called assay sensitivity. Fancy term, but it just means your trial has to be good enough to tell the difference between a drug that works and one that doesn't. And finally, how you analyze your patients is a really, really big deal. So, you're going to have to look at your results in at least two different ways. The intention to treat group includes everybody you randomized, even the people who didn't follow the rules perfectly. This tends to blur the lines and can actually make it easier to claim non-inferiority. Then you have the per-protocol group. These are your star students who did everything right. The bottom line is regulators are going to demand that you show non-inferiority in both groups. If the results don't match up, that's a huge red flag. So, you've done all the hard work. The trial is finally over. You've got your data. Now what? What does it all mean? Well, it all boils down to one thing, where your confidence interval lands on a graph. And this chart here shows it all perfectly. The whole story depends on where that 95% confidence interval for the treatment difference falls.
If the entire bar is above 0, hey, congratulations, your drug is actually superior. If its lower end stays above your margin, minus delta, but it crosses 0, boom, you've hit your goal. You are non-inferior. But if any part of that bar crosses your margin, your result is inconclusive. And get this, check out outcome 4. It's totally possible to be both statistically inferior and clinically non-inferior at the exact same time. Wild, right?
This quote just nails the bizarre logic we've been talking about. So here's the crucial point. Failing to prove non-inferiority, meaning your confidence interval crossed that margin, it doesn't automatically mean your treatment is inferior. It just means you failed to prove it wasn't unacceptably worse. The result isn't inferior, it's not non-inferior. I know, it's a mouthful. Now, because all this logic is inverted, you have to be on the lookout for some very unique traps. These are dangers that can totally sink your trial if you're not careful, so you have to plan for them from day one. Okay, this is, without a doubt, the most dangerous paradox of these trials. In a normal superiority trial, being sloppy, poor patient compliance, messy data, usually means you fail, because it hides the real effect. But here, it's the exact opposite. Poor quality actually helps you. It blurs the real differences between the treatments, making them look more similar, and making it way too easy to incorrectly conclude that you're non-inferior. It's crazy. So you've got to avoid these 3 killers. First, poor assay sensitivity. I mean, think about it. If your active control drug wasn't even working in your study, then of course your new drug is going to look just as good. Second is something called biocreep. This is where you get a chain of trials. Drug C is non-inferior to B, which was non-inferior to A, and over time, the effectiveness slowly creeps down closer and closer to a placebo. And finally, just plain sloppy conduct, which, as we said, can perversely make you look good. Rigor in these trials isn't just important, it's everything. So if you remember just one thing from all this, make it this. A non-inferiority trial is not the lazy option. It's not a shortcut. The burden of proof is still squarely on your shoulders to show with incredible rigor that you have preserved a truly meaningful clinical effect, all while bringing those other important benefits to patients. And I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Your entire conclusion, your entire claim of non-inferiority rests on one giant historical assumption, that your active control drug is working just as well in your trial today as it did in all those old trials from years ago. If that assumption is wrong, if the constancy isn't there, then your entire trial might just be built on a foundation of sand, and that's something you really need to think about before you even begin.